The Room is a game series I enjoy a lot, and it's exactly what you see. You open very intricate puzzle boxes. In the first game, it's individual boxes, later on they get more open, sometimes taking place across several rooms, kinda stretching the definition of a puzzle box. These games are incredibly satisfying with their little animations and how you have to do everything yourself. To turn a key, you actually have to turn it. To pull a lever, you have to drag it left or right, and so on. And these actions always open something new to discover, making it feel satisfying and rewarding anytime you do literally anything. It's one of my favorite game series, and even though I like the separate puzzle boxes of the first games more, the more open approach of the later games is still tons of fun to me, but I was craving more. And there's gotta be more games with that same kind of gameplay, right? I'm Jen, and today I will show you 10 games like The Room, or rather, 2 trilogies and some standalone games. I actually wanted to only cover 5 in this first video, but I didn't want to treat the trilogies as one, but also wanted a bunch of different games, so 10 it is. The House of Da Vinci is probably the best known game on this list, but also the most expensive one on PC with its €20 price tag. Just for reference, you can get all 4 non-VR The Room games in a bundle for only slightly more. That's interesting since it costs the same as the 4th The Room game on the Play Store. So in that way I would call it overpriced, but that doesn't change the fact that this is an extremely well made and polished experience that really captures the feeling of the later The Room games, where you roam around larger areas with smaller, mostly interconnected puzzles. It really feels like a logical continuation of the Room series, so if you have played all of those and want more, The House of Da Vinci is a great and challenging game that you should definitely check out. There's also a VR version that I haven't played yet and I'm kinda curious about, since the original game wasn't made for VR, but people seem to like it, so I wanna check it out in the future. The House of Da Vinci 2 and also 3 cost the same as the first one, so if you wanna get all 3 you have to pay €60, except on mobile where it's a total of 18. Sure. But let's talk about the second game for now. I decided to play it on mobile because I got it in the Google Play Store sale for €3. Yep. And as you would probably expect, it also mostly covers bigger areas rather than individual puzzle boxes. And my biggest nitpick has to do with exactly that. The areas feel bigger than in the first game, and because they are so big, it can be kinda hard to find certain objects, since some of them are hidden pretty well, and it can be kinda hard to figure out where certain things belong. Especially when you come back after a longer break, it's very easy to forget some of the little things you can zoom in on, or where certain items have to go. That made the game feel harder than it actually is. Though to be fair, there are always hints you can use if you want to feel bad about not figuring something out on your own. But overall, it's still an amazing game, with an extremely interesting new mechanic, environments that feel genuinely great for the most part, and super satisfying gameplay. I actually even like this one a bit more than the first one. Definitely play it if you're into this kind of stuff. The House of Da Vinci 3 marks the end of the trilogy, and I gotta say right off the bat, why is it online only? I can't speak for the PC version, but whenever I start the game on my phone, it needs to synchronize the profiles, for which it needs to check my license, and only then can I play a single-player offline game. What the Anyway, a thing I haven't mentioned about the first 2 games is that they're actually pretty story-focused. I never cared and always skipped through it, but this one goes way harder on the story. We get many cutscenes and they lead to a hopefully good conclusion, but again, I didn't really pay attention to it. For me, it's about the gameplay, and the gameplay introduces a new mechanic. Pushing things. Yep, can only be used on specific things and feels like a gimmick more than anything, introduced for the sake of introducing something new. You use it a handful of times and it was only part of a puzzle once, the rest were kinda just glorified cutscenes, but I didn't mind it. It was there, I guess. That aside, the gameplay is technically the same as the first 2 games, but it manages to feel different. Let me explain. While there are a few smaller individual boxes in the beginning, the environments get very open pretty quickly, and this game is probably the best iteration of that open approach to date. The areas are interconnected extremely well, and the puzzles are challenging, making me use the hints more than ever. But broken down, most of the time you zoom in on something, do 1 or 2 things there, collect an item or 2, zoom into something else, collect an item or 2, sometimes you also have to return later with a different item to do another thing or 2, and so on. Notice something? I don't know about you, but this kinda reminds me of those 2D point-and-click escape room games. The Room, and also the previous House of Da Vinci games, managed to never feel like that. There was always more going on in the locations, whereas here you just move back and forth all the time to do or pick up 1 or 2 things, and honestly, I like the other ones more for that. I like these 2D escape room type games, especially the Rusty Lake series is one I'm a huge fan of. I've even played their amazing escape room at TwitchCon Rotterdam. But when I play a puzzle box game like The Room, I just expect something else. People seem to really like the House of Da Vinci 3, calling it the best one in the series, and it probably is the most polished and the most exciting one, but at the same time, it's my least favorite one. The studio's next game has already been announced, and being done with Da Vinci, they now moved on to Tesla. The House of Tesla releases later this year and can be wishlisted on Steam. There is even a free demo already that I haven't played yet. I'll either play it for the next video, or if the game releases by then, do that instead. I hope it will be more up my alley. The Artifact is a PC-exclusive game, and basically a less polished The Room in a futuristic setting. But while the gameplay is basically the same, there are plenty of things that make it feel inferior, like not being able to zoom out by right-clicking, or not being able to look at the things in your inventory, or not having any settings other than resolution and graphics. Like, I can't turn down the volume of the annoyingly repetitive soundtrack? Really? The UI looking like it was meant to be a mobile game doesn't help either, or that it's extremely easy and short, took me about 40 minutes to beat, or the price of $7.99. Yes, you heard me right, it's more expensive than the first 3 The Room games while offering less in pretty much every regard. But if you can ignore these things and get it in a sale for 90% off, which I did, it kind of delivers on what you would expect from it. I'm not gonna pretend like it's this masterpiece or anything, but it was one of the first games of this kind. Actually the earliest non-The Room game with this gameplay that I'm aware of. I didn't like it that much, but I also can't pretend like it didn't scratch that itch at all. If you're into the more open type of The Room 3 and Old Sins, or if you've already played all the other games, you might find a little bit of enjoyment here. But overall, there are far better alternatives. Cats in Time is available on both mobile and Steam, and the first few levels are free on mobile, and on Steam there is a demo. The gameplay itself is the same as The Room, but the levels here are pretty big dioramas, often based on different time periods, and you have to find cats in them. Through that, by not being a puzzle box game so to say, it somehow manages to not feel like The Room at all. I'd even go as far as to say that, out of all games in this video, this one is the least similar to it. And that sadly also applies to the satisfaction you get from these little animations that I normally love so much. It's barely there, thanks to the lack of challenge and interesting things happening. I mean, you can see it, these puzzles feel like they were made for small children. And while some interesting things do happen here and there, like something opening in a creative way, and the animations that play in these cases are nice, it happens way too rarely. Some of the cats are even out in the open, just waiting to be picked up, literally no puzzle attached to them, just for the satisfaction of collecting them, I guess. The only challenge in this game comes from finding the secrets that every level has. Some of them are pretty well hidden, so if you want to go for 100%, there's at least that. But even that is more about looking for them than solving puzzles or opening things to find them. Overall, Cats in Time isn't all that remarkable or even noteworthy to me. It doesn't do anything wrong or bad necessarily, it's just kinda boring. I played through the whole thing just because I like the gameplay and wanted more of it, but if you expect anything beyond that, you will probably be disappointed. Most puzzles can barely even be called puzzles, and the feeling of exploration is also next to none, despite the size of the levels. For me, it's at best a nice time waster thanks to the gameplay, but nothing more than that. Sherlocked is a Dutch escape room company, and this game, Sherlocked's The Vault, is a free mobile exclusive prologue to one of their rooms. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy it on its own though. It's a very short one, I literally finished in 20 minutes, but it has some interesting puzzles. Nice to have a little bit of a challenge after some of the other games on this list. You go through 2 small-ish rooms that have very different vibes to each other, and the exact same gameplay as The Room. Super satisfying. I would absolutely recommend it, and actually got intrigued to visit one of their actual rooms at some point. Come to think of it, I should go to more escape rooms in general. While The Room works extremely well on phones, to me personally it's always been more of a computer game, and I'm glad that it got ported over. The Birdcage, on the other hand, feels like it was made for phones, with all the birdcages you have to open being tall. And just like in the first The Room game, it's always just one at a time, which I love, and the gameplay is pretty much the exact same too, making it a great alternative and finally one that focuses on individual objects rather than whole rooms. The only real difference between the two is the difficulty. The Birdcage is extremely easy, and most of the fun actually lies in these little animations and not in the puzzles. So if all you're looking for is to open some creative puzzle boxes with satisfying gameplay, the Birdcage is your game. But of course it's not perfect. There are 2 things that bothered me a bit. The The first one is the puzzles getting a little repetitive later on. It's not too big of a deal, but definitely noticeable. The other one is the birdcages opening on their own after you solve them. Let me explain. In the room, the House of Da Vinci, even Sherlock's the vault, you do everything yourself, including opening all the doors. That increases immersion, but also makes it feel super satisfying when something happens as a result, like in this case the birds flying out, or even just seeing something new, like a new room. So the door opening on its own after you turn the key just feels like that cherry on top is being taken away from me. I don't know if you can relate, and it's a really minor nitpick, but it did make the game feel a little more handholdy and less satisfying overall. Oh, and I should also mention that the game crashed 3 times on my Samsung Galaxy S22. That probably shouldn't happen. Those things aside, I like the Birdcage a lot. There are 5 themes with 5 levels each, and you get the tutorial level plus the first 2 themes for free if you just want to try it out. But keep in mind that the difficulty is pretty much the same from the second theme onwards, so don't expect the paid levels to be harder. On top of that, there are collectibles in each level to unlock a small story and an additional epilogue level with its own theme, and while a total of 27 levels might sound like a lot at first, keep in mind that they're easy, which also makes them pretty short. Without looking at the time and across several sessions, it probably took me about an hour to beat the whole thing, maybe an hour and a half. So again, it really is more about the satisfying gameplay, not the challenge or the length. I found it worth my money, but I'm also a sucker for these kinds of games, and this is one of the more polished ones, so try it out and buy the rest if you like it. The Birdcage 2 is pretty much the same as the first one, so if you like that one, you will like this one too. There are a few changes though, like the amount of levels. There is one more world here, so instead of 27 levels, including tutorial and epilogue, you now have 32, with the first 2 worlds being free again. Collectibles are now hidden a bit better, especially later on, and there is also a new mechanic, a magic wand with different spells, but there is no real difference in what they do, and you can only ever use the correct one. So despite using the wand in almost every level, it only really plays into puzzles like 2 or 3 times, so it feels kinda pointless. And I would also say that the levels feel longer than in the first game. They are a bit harder, and on top of that, the puzzles themselves take longer to finish as well. And I guess the last real difference are the birds themselves. Instead of normal birds, you now get mythical ones like dragons and phoenixes, with their own pretty cool looking cages. But it's only the paid levels. The free ones have owls and crows. Of course that doesn't make a difference gameplay-wise, but let's be real, you can only take the concept of opening bird cages so far, so I appreciate that they tried. But as I said earlier, it is basically the same game as the first one. With all these small changes, it kinda feels like they were trying to innovate, but they ended up creating the same game once more, down to the 3 crashes that I experienced again. So would I recommend it? Absolutely. If you like the Birdcage, this one gives you more of just that. But at the same time, it does make me curious about the Birdcage 3. Did they try but fail to innovate once more? Let's see. This one actually changed a lot of things, starting with the worlds. Instead of types of birds, this one is based around settings like ancient Egypt and cyberpunk. And as always, the first 2 worlds are free, and this time they have 6 levels each, not just 5. The problem though is that there are only 4 worlds in total, and the 2 paid ones only have 5 levels each. So not only does this game have the least amount of levels at 22, you also get more than half for free. That felt kinda weird to me as a paying customer, since you don't know how many levels per world you get before paying for them. I just assumed it would be 6, like the free ones. And there are also no secrets this time, and no epilogue level. That was kinda disappointing. At the end of the game you get a message telling you to keep the game installed because there will be more levels, but all we got in the year since it released is a Steam version called Wizard of Wings Escape with a different developer name. Kinda shady if you ask me. Anyway, some more differences between the first 2 games and this one include that you can now switch to the bird's perspective. You mostly just pick something up or look at the combinations for one of the puzzles though, so just like the magic wand in the Birdcage 2, this felt more like a pointless gimmick that you have to do every level and not like a meaningful mechanic, but it also didn't hurt too much. That aside, you can now also interact with things in the rooms themselves, outside of the Birdcage. That makes some of the puzzles more elaborate, which sounds good on paper, but in reality it feels kinda clunky with how you have to zoom out, rotate around the Birdcage and stare at the edges of your screen to tap on the glowing things. Like, the fact that they had to make them glow for you to realize that you can interact with them should have sent some signals, but for some reason they decided to roll with it. I guess it's better in the Steam version with a landscape format, but I don't know. And that clunky feeling is supported by not being able to zoom out of puzzles by pinching, or how the game feels more handholdy, with more things happening on their own, like doors opening or screwdrivers turning. The whole game feels like they were trying to innovate and streamline the whole thing, but ended up creating a little bit of a mess. Not too much, just a little bit. The overall difficulty is a bit higher than in the Birdcage 2 though, and this time I would say that there were actually some challenging puzzles, on top of them being more creative. By the way, is it just me or are these cages too convoluted? I don't know, it kinda like the symbol designs of the first two games. All of these things combined make the Birdcage 3 my least favorite one of the series, and it's not even close. Playing the first game I actually had to stop myself from continuing sometimes, because I had other things to do. Here, I often had to force myself to play it at all. In my opinion, they focus on the wrong things, trying to innovate but kinda giving up the beautiful simplicity in the process. I wouldn't call the game bad. It is well made and has some interesting puzzles. It's just not really my thing, but I guess it didn't crash a single time, and that's a definite upgrade. From the guys who brought us the Birdcage, we now have the Jackbox. Yep, same thing, just with Jackboxes. And again, you get the first few levels for free, except this time there are actually a lot of levels. 60 plus tutorial, epilogue and a secret level, making a total of 63. And the first 3 packs, 10 levels each plus a tutorial, are free. This one is more horror focused, with scary music playing in the background and jump scares or other spooky things happening sometimes. But to be honest, those spooky things are annoying at best and just waste time. They only appear after some time and the first 20 levels are so easy that I didn't really get to see any of them, but especially with the last 20 levels, it was genuinely annoying that the game so desperately wants to interrupt you for a few seconds all the time. And what's even worse, if you don't pay for the full version, these jump scares will actually make you lose and restart the levels. I didn't know that paying for the full version had any effect on that, so I didn't record it, but imagine having to redo everything just because you took a little too long. It's not even that big of a deal because redoing everything in the puzzle game is pretty easy, but really? You have to restart the level in a puzzle game where the puzzles don't change because you took a little too long? And the puzzles sometimes being based around trial and error doesn't help either. They are rarely extremely difficult or anything, but sometimes seem unsolvable unless you just try stuff out. Gameplay-wise, it feels a little more clunky than the Birdcage. That is of course hard to explain when the gameplay is literally just tapping and dragging on the phone screen, but the thing that you can see is that every level is basically the exact same thing. You have unconnected puzzles on the 3 sides of the Jackbox, and then open the box on the last side. The discovery of what or where the puzzles are and in which ways they're interconnected, both of which are a huge part of the fun in games like The Room and the Birdcage, are completely gone here. It is always obvious what and where the puzzles are, and they only ever play out on the one side of the box they're on. That took a lot of the charm away. That and all the boxes looking the same. Gone is the creativity of different Birdcages per world. Here it's just different colors, making it feel like trying to come up with more levels sucked out the developer's creativity. And that's a shame, especially seeing how the types of puzzles are pretty repetitive, especially later on. Interestingly, the epilogue level is unlocked by default in this one, this time having puzzles on all 4 sides, but the secret level isn't. It's unlocked by finding barely visible collectibles and then putting together small jigsaw puzzles. That secret level was genuinely fun to solve, having multiple puzzles per side and being deeply connected with the story that you also unlock with the jigsaws. Like, you actually have to read and understand it to be able to solve the puzzles. I like that. Now, based on all of this, you might think that it was released before the Birdcage, a first game where they were testing the waters but didn't quite get the formula right yet, only to nail it with their next game and make sequels for that one instead. But apparently it was released after the Birdcage too. I have a hard time seeing how, to be honest. It's an okay-ish game if you need your The Room fix, but so far my least favorite one. It feels more clunky, has no feeling of discovery, and is pretty repetitive. The only real positive here is seeing how it was developed by the same people as the Birdcage. The game only crashed once this time. And those were the 10 games for today. I still have over 20 games on my radar, though I have yet to play most of these, but I think I'll have enough material for at least 1 or 2 more of these videos. But of course, feel free to suggest more, maybe I've overlooked some and I would love to play them. But on this note, don't forget to subscribe. I talk about all kinds of obscure media and big franchises on this channel, so make sure to check it out. Also follow me on Twitch at yourLocalJen for chatting and yourGamerJen for gaming. Thank you so much for watching, have a wonderful day or night or whatever, and goodbye.